After the recent drone attack against U.S. troops stationing near the borders between Syria and Jordan, neocon lawmakers and military pundits with close ties to the military-industrial complex are urging President Biden to strike Iran and hit Tehran directly to reestablish deterrence. One of the presidential candidates, Nikki Haley, who is known for not being the smartest among the candidates, says the US must play tough and hit Iran to prevent war. I mean, this logic prevailed after the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union because there was no serious challenge to the US hegemony around the world. But 2022 is different, and we cannot bypass the geopolitical facts. For example, Ukraine has not become a quagmire for the Russian forces as the Americans were planning, like they did in the Afghanistan war in the 80s. The Chinese are spreading their influence, leverage, call it whatever you want, around the world and especially in the global south through investments, business investments, and building the infrastructure of these countries and gaining the hearts and the minds of the people instead of bombing them and forcing them to become their friends or allies. The US lost its regime change war in Syria, for example, which started in 2011 and lasted till 2017, and now they are speaking about withdrawing their troops from Syria and Iraq. What combines these, for example, major geopolitical events is that Iran has benefited from each and every one of them and reached a level of military strength that emboldened the partners of Tehran in the region. Take Ansarullah, for example. They are blocking the cargo ships of the US, the UK, and Israel, and they are imposing an embargo or a siege on the cargo ships that are heading to Israel, calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, had to fly to meet with the Chinese foreign minister asking for the Chinese help to lift the siege in the Red Sea against the Israeli, American, and British cargo ships. The Americans tried to lift the siege. They sent warships, they engaged in a battle against the Houthis, they even bombed the Ansarullah in different parts in Yemen, and they failed. And speaking of Gaza, the United States, in my opinion, stands naked nowadays in front of the world. Because as a superpower, the United States' role is to police the world and try to end wars, mediate, activate diplomacy, and not to flare the fires, for example, in the region nowadays in the Middle East. And the United States is considered complicit with Israel in its onslaught against the Palestinians in Gaza in the eyes of the entire global South nowadays. Therefore, many people lost respect to the United States as a superpower in this regard. These events, in my opinion, indicate that it is Iran backed by its partners in the region, for example, Hezbollah, Syria, Ansarullah movement, and other groups in Iraq and elsewhere. And behind them, rising superpowers like Russia and China. Due to this, it's Iran that is establishing deterrence with the Americans in the region. Whether you like the Iranians or not, this is a different issue. But if these events happened in 2-3 decades ago, you would see different calculations by the Americans. But now the Americans should make many calculations, because if they hit Iran directly, it will trigger huge retaliation against the American troops in the region who are sitting like ducks, their businesses, their assets, their partners in the region. And it will also be considered an attack against the interests of China and Russia. These two countries have invited Iran to the BRICS, to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example. Russia is trying to strike a pact with the Iranians. Therefore, in my opinion, one of the nightmares of the American geopolitical experts was that these three countries, China and Russia and Iran, would come together. Those are considered the three pillars of Eurasia. This was their nightmare. And I think they have to blame themselves in the US for bullying and trying to suppress the rise of these three powers, and instead of trying to cooperate with them, include them to the international community. In the mindset of the American decision makers, they had to suppress them and they have to subjugate them. Therefore, these three countries, which by the way have different interests around the world, they have come together and they combined their efforts. And this represents a major challenge nowadays to the American so-called rules-based order, which in my opinion is demising. And there is a rise of alternative powers. I'm not saying that the Americans will disappear from the scene, but definitely they will not be able to be the hegemon and subjugate the world that they used to do after World War II.